Captain Dae Kim stood perfectly still as the massive doors opened before him. The metal gleamed under lights that seemed too bright, too blue. Behind him, Ambassador Yuna Lee adjusted her jacket one last time. Commander Woong Park kept his hand near his sidearm, though they had been assured this was a peaceful meeting. They were the first humans to ever step foot on Velron Prime, the heart of the Galactic Coalition. For 12,000 years, 47 different alien species had lived together in peace under one government. Now, humanity had been invited to join them. Day had read the reports during the 6-month journey here. The coalition was powerful. They controlled thousands of star systems. Their technology was centuries ahead of Earth's. Their ships could cross the galaxy in weeks. Their weapons could crack planets in half. And yet, as Day walked into the Grand Hall, he felt something was wrong. The chamber was enormous. Hundreds of aliens filled the space, their bodies strange and wonderful. Some looked like insects, with hard shells and too many eyes. Others resembled birds, with feathers that shimmered like oil on water. Some were tall and thin, their skin translucent. Others were short and round, with tentacles instead of arms. At the center of the room, on a raised platform, sat High Chancellor Vexthar. He was insectoid, his body covered in black armor-like plates. His 4 eyes watched the humans approach. His mandibles clicked together, making a sound that the translation device in Day's ear turned into words. "Welcome, humans of Earth," Vexthar said. His voice was cold, formal. "You have been deemed worthy of consideration for membership in our coalition." Yuna stepped forward and bowed slightly. "We are honored by this invitation, High Chancellor. Humanity seeks only friendship and cooperation with the species of the galaxy." Vexthar's mandibles clicked again. It might have been a laugh. Of course, all primitive species say such things when they first arrive. He gestured with one of his 4 arms. "Before we proceed, there is a tradition, a demonstration, if you will. It helps new species understand their place in our order." Day felt Woong tense beside him. Something was definitely wrong. From the shadows at the edge of the hall, figures emerged. They were massive, easily 3 meters tall, with thick muscles and dark red skin. Horns curved from their heads. Their eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. They wore armor that looked like it had been through 1,000 battles. "The Krath Warriors," Vexthar announced. "The finest soldiers in the coalition. They will show you what we mean by understanding your place." The Krath formed a circle around the human delegation. One of them stepped forward and opened his mouth. A sound came out, deep and resonant, vibrating through the air. It wasn't just sound. Day could feel it in his bones, in his chest. Around the chamber, the alien observers shifted uncomfortably. Some moved backward. Others lowered their heads or covered their sensory organs. The sound was having an effect on them, but Day felt nothing. He looked at Yuna. She raised an eyebrow, confused. Woong crossed his arms, looking annoyed. The Krath warrior closed his mouth. He looked confused. He tried again, this time louder. The sound filled the chamber like thunder. Aliens around the room began to shake. Some fell to their knees. The fear was visible on their faces, in their body language. The humans stood there, waiting. "Is that supposed to do something?" Yuna asked calmly. The chamber went silent. Even the Krath warriors looked at each other, uncertain. This had never happened before. Every species they had ever encountered responded to their fear call. It was biological, primal. It bypassed conscious thought and triggered the deepest survival instincts. But the humans just stood there. Vexthar leaned forward on his throne. Curious. Perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand. "Krath, proceed with the physical demonstration." One of the warriors moved toward Day. He was twice Day's size, with muscles that could crush stone. He reached out with one massive hand. Day didn't move. He looked up at the warrior with calm, steady eyes. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said quietly. The warrior hesitated. Something in Day's voice and his posture made the huge alien pause. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. It was the look of someone who had been in fights before, who knew exactly what violence looked like and who wasn't impressed. Wung stepped forward slowly. His hand was now on his sidearm. The ambassador asked a question, he said. His voice was level, professional. What exactly is this demonstration supposed to do? Around the chamber, the other aliens were recovering from the fear call. They watched the humans with new eyes. These small, soft-looking creatures had not responded at all. What did that mean? Yuna turned to face Vexthar directly. High Chancellor, if this is a test of our courage, we've already passed it. If this is meant to intimidate us into submission, it won't work. And if this is how you welcome new members, then perhaps we need to reconsider whether the coalition is the kind of organization humanity wants to join. Her words were diplomatic but firm. She wasn't angry, she wasn't afraid. She was simply stating facts. Vexathar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. You are defective, he said finally. Your species does not respond to proper stimuli. This makes you unpredictable. Dangerous, perhaps. Day spoke up. With respect, High Chancellor, we respond to stimuli just fine. We're not afraid because there's nothing here to be afraid of. You brought us into a room, surrounded us with soldiers, and tried to scare us into obedience. On Earth, we call that bullying. He paused. And humans don't respond well to bullies. The chamber erupted into noise. Aliens began talking to each other in dozens of languages. The translation device in Day's ear couldn't keep up with all of it, but he caught the general tone. Shock, confusion, some anger, some fear. Vexathar raised one arm, and the noise died down. You will be assigned quarters, he said coldly. The council will deliberate on your petition for membership. Until then, you will remain on Velron Prime as our guests. The way he said guests made it clear they were actually prisoners. As the human delegation was escorted out of the chamber, Day heard the whispers. He saw the looks. The aliens weren't sure what to make of humans. They had expected fear and got none. They had expected submission and got defiance. Later, in their assigned quarters, Wung paced back and forth. That was a setup, he said. They wanted to see us break. Yuna nodded. The coalition maintains order through fear. Every species here has been conditioned to understand that the coalition is stronger, more powerful, and will always win. They use fear as a tool of control. Day looked out the window at the alien city below. Lights glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, 47 species lived their lives under the rule of the coalition, all of them bound by fear. They think we're defective because we're not afraid, he said quietly. But we're not fearless. We're just used to being afraid. Every human grows up with fear. Fear of the dark, fear of heights, fear of death. We live with it every day. He turned to face his companions. The difference is, we learn to keep moving anyway. Yuna smiled slightly. They're going to learn that the hard way, aren't they? Probably, Day agreed. He had a feeling that humanity's introduction to galactic society was going to be much more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The coalition thought they understood fear. They were about to discover they had only experienced the shallow end of it. Humans knew fear intimately, and that made them far more dangerous than any species that had simply been scared into submission. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the council chamber. The coalition had granted humanity probationary membership, which meant humans could work in coalition space, but had no real authority or rights. They were given the worst jobs, the hardest shifts, and treated like servants by most of the alien species. Lieutenant Gina Cho didn't mind the hard work. She was an engineer, and engines were engines whether they were human or alien. The mining station called Theta 9 orbited a gas giant on the edge of coalition space. It processed valuable minerals from the planet's rings. The work was dangerous, the hours were long, and the pay was minimal. Her supervisor, Overseer Quelm, made sure to remind her of humanity's low status every single day. He was reptilian, with green scales and cold eyes that never blinked. He walked on 2 legs but had a thick tail that he used for balance. Human, Quelm hissed at her as she checked the pressure readings on Tank 7. You are too slow. Work faster, or I will report your inadequacy to the council. Gina bit back her response. She wanted to tell him that she was actually ahead of schedule, that the work was being done properly and safely. But humans had been warned not to cause trouble, so she just nodded and continued working. Her partner, Tae Song, was a geologist studying the mineral deposits. He worked in the lower levels, deep in the station's core where the processing happened. They met for meals when their shifts aligned, which wasn't often. Hyun Kang was different. He was security, former special forces back on Earth. He didn't hide his dislike for how humans were being treated. He stood by the docking bay, watching ships come and go, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. One day, he told Gina during a break, "They're going to push too far." "Just keep your head down," Gina advised. "We're trying to prove we can work with them." Hyun snorted. "They don't want us to work with them. They want us to work for them. There's a difference." That conversation happened in the morning. By afternoon, everything changed. The explosion came from the lower levels. It wasn't huge, but it was enough. The station shook. Alarms began to wail. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Gina ran toward the command center. Other workers were running too, but away from the danger. She pushed past them, trying to reach someone in authority. Quelm was in the command center, staring at screens that showed disaster. "Seal the lower levels," he ordered. "Seal them now." "What happened?" Gina demanded. "A support column failed," another supervisor explained. She was bird-like, with feathers the color of rust. "The entire lower section has collapsed. 200 workers were down there." "Then we need to get them out." Quelm turned to her with those cold, unblinking eyes. "The toxic gases are flooding in. The structure is unstable. Any rescue attempt would result in more deaths. It is unfortunate, but acceptable." "Acceptable?" Gina couldn't believe what she was hearing. "There are 200 people down there." "And 4,000 up here," Quelm replied. "I will not risk the station for workers who are already lost. The lower levels are sealed. This discussion is over." Gina stood there, frozen. Around the command center, the other aliens nodded. Some looked sad, others looked resigned. But none of them argued. This was normal for them. When the risk was too high, you cut your losses. She turned and ran. Hyun was already at the sealed door when she arrived. He was studying the controls, his face grim. "They sealed it," he said. "We can't get through without authorization." "Tae is down there," Gina said. Her voice was shaking. "He was working in the processing center." Hyun looked at her. Something passed between them, an understanding that didn't need words. They were human. They didn't accept acceptable losses. "Get me a cutting torch," Hyun said, "and find anyone else willing to help." 20 minutes later, 12 humans stood at the sealed door. Some were engineers like Gina. Others were maintenance workers, cargo handlers, kitchen staff. They weren't trained for rescue operations, but they were all that 200 trapped workers had. "This is insane," said one of the humans, a young woman named Bora. "The structure could collapse completely. The gases will kill us." "Probably," Hyun agreed. He had cut through the door's locking mechanism. "Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. I won't think less of you." Nobody moved. "All right then," Hyun pulled the door open. Black smoke poured out. The air smelled like burning metal and chemicals. "Let's go get them." They descended into hell. The lower levels were a nightmare. Metal beams had fallen, crushing equipment and blocking corridors. Fires burned in some sections. The air was thick with smoke and gas. Gina wrapped cloth around her face, but it didn't help much. Every breath hurt. They found the first survivors in a sealed storage room. 8 aliens, various species, huddled together in the dark. They looked at the humans with confusion and hope. "We're getting you out," Gina told them. "Follow us." "The gases," one of them wheezed. "We cannot survive." "Then we'll carry you," Gina said simply. And they did. The humans took the weakened aliens and carried them through the smoke and fire. Some aliens were twice their size, but the humans managed. They climbed over debris, crawled through tight spaces, and refused to stop. Hyun led the way, finding paths through the wreckage. Gina and the other engineers figured out which structures were stable and which were about to collapse. They moved as a team, communicating with gestures when the smoke was too thick to see. They found more survivors, a group trapped behind a fallen beam, others in an elevator shaft. Each time, the humans pulled them out, carried them, helped them. Bora was hit by falling debris. A metal plate caught her shoulder, and Gina heard bones crack. Bora screamed but didn't stop. She kept moving, kept helping, even with her arm hanging uselessly. The gases were getting worse. Gina felt dizzy. Her eyes burned. Her lungs felt like they were on fire. Around her, the other humans were suffering too. But they kept going. Tay was in the processing center, trapped under machinery. It took 6 humans to lift it off him. His leg was broken, and he was barely conscious. Gina held him as they climbed back toward the upper levels. "Stupid," Tay mumbled. "You're all stupid for coming down here." "Yeah," Gina agreed, tears streaming down her face from the smoke. "We're very stupid." The climb back took hours. The station shook twice more, and new collapses nearly buried them. They lost the path several times and had to backtrack. Some of the aliens they were carrying died despite their efforts, but they saved most of them. When they finally emerged into the upper levels, a crowd had gathered. Aliens from all over the station stood watching as the humans carried out survivor after survivor. 187 workers saved. 13 lost. Medical teams rushed forward. Quelm was there too, his mouth hanging open in shock. Gina collapsed. She had breathed too much of the toxic gas. Her lungs were damaged, possibly permanently. Medics tried to take her to treatment, but she pushed them away. "Them first," she wheezed, pointing at the aliens they had rescued. "Treat them first." The medics looked confused. "You are severely injured. You need immediate care." "I said them first." Gina's voice was barely a whisper now, but it was firm. All around her, the other humans were doing the same thing. Bora, with her shattered shoulder, refused treatment until the aliens were helped. Hyun, who had burns covering his arms, sat quietly against a wall, waiting his turn. The aliens who had been rescued sat staring at their saviors. They had questions in their eyes. Questions like, why? Why would you risk your lives for us? Why would you suffer for strangers? Why would you go into certain death when you could have stayed safe? Humans didn't have a simple answer. It wasn't about logic or strategy. It was just something they did. When someone needed help, you helped them. When someone was in danger, you tried to save them. Even if it hurt. Even if it cost you. Even if it made no sense. Quelm approached Gina. His cold eyes were different now. There was something in them that hadn't been there before. Respect, maybe? Or fear. "Why did you do this?" he asked quietly. Gina looked up at him. Her face was covered in soot. Her hands were burnt. She could barely breathe, but she smiled. "Because they needed help," she said. "Isn't that reason enough?" Quelm had no answer. He turned and walked away, and Gina could see him trembling. News of the rescue spread through Coalition space faster than light. Humanity, the species that felt no fear, had done something impossible. They had chosen courage over safety. They had chosen others over themselves. The galaxy was starting to understand that humans were different, and that difference was starting to scare them. 2 months had passed since the rescue at Station Theta 9. The story had become legend across Coalition space. Humans were now seen as either heroes or threats, depending on who you asked. The Council decided they needed to understand these strange creatures better. Dr. Minho Bayek was a human xenobiologist, one of the few scientists allowed into Coalition research facilities. He had been asked to study human biology and explain it to the Coalition's leading minds. What he found made him uncomfortable. In a conference room on Velron Prime, he stood before a panel of alien scientists and military commanders. At the center sat War Master Kryn, the Coalition's greatest military leader. Kryn was massive, with 6 limbs and armor-like skin that could stop bullets. He had fought in 73 battles and never lost. "Explain," Kryn rumbled. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Minho pulled up a holographic display of a human body. "Humans are pursuit predators," he began. On Earth, this is rare. Most predators are ambush hunters. They wait, they pounce, they kill quickly. Humans are different. Humans chase their prey for hours, sometimes days, until the prey collapses from exhaustion. The aliens in the room shifted uncomfortably. Look at the eyes, Minho continued, highlighting the human face. Forward-facing. This gives depth perception, which is critical for hunters. Most prey species have eyes on the sides of their heads to watch for danger. Humans have eyes that track, that focus, that hunt. Many species have forward eyes, one scientist objected. True, Minho agreed, but combine it with everything else. Humans can run for incredible distances. They sweat to cool down, which means they can keep going when other species would overheat. They can function with injuries that would kill most creatures. Broken bones? Humans can keep fighting. Severe blood loss? They can survive it. Pain? They can ignore it when necessary. He brought up another image. Humans need sleep, but they can override this need for days when survival requires it. They have incredible endurance, and perhaps most importantly, he paused, they pack bond. Pack bond? Kryn leaned forward. Humans form emotional attachments to almost anything. Other humans, animals, even objects. Once a human considers something part of their pack, they will die to protect it. The rescue at Theta 9 wasn't unusual behavior. Those aliens became part of their pack the moment humans decided to save them. The room was silent. One of the scientists, a insectoid with translucent wings, spoke up. But they show no fear response. How can they be predators if they lack survival instincts? Minho shook his head. They have fear. They just process it differently. Human evolution happened on a death world. Everything on Earth was trying to kill them. Predators, diseases, weather, other humans. They couldn't afford to freeze when afraid. They had to act. So they evolved to feel fear and keep moving anyway. War Master Kryn stood up. His 6 limbs moved with surprising grace. I want to test them, he announced. We will see how these humans perform in combat scenarios. That's how Cadet Leah Han found herself in a military simulation with 12 other human trainees. They stood in a large holographic environment that looked like a rocky canyon. Above them, in an observation deck, War Master Kryn and dozens of other Coalition military officers watched. Leah was young, barely 20, with short black hair and quick eyes. She had joined the Coalition Military Academy, hoping to prove that humans could fight alongside aliens as equals. Now she was being tested. This is a defensive scenario, Kryn's voice echoed through the canyon. You will hold this position against enemy forces. The simulation will continue until you are all eliminated or you surrender. What are we defending? Leah called up to the observation deck. Nothing. This is just a test of your limits. Leah looked at her fellow humans. They understood what this really was. The Coalition wanted to see them break. They wanted to see humans give up. How many enemies? Asked Minsu, one of the larger trainees. Enough, was all Kryn said. The simulation began. Holographic enemies appeared at the far end of the canyon. Dozens of them, then hundreds. They came in waves, never stopping. They had better weapons, better armor, better numbers. The Coalition observers expected the humans to last maybe 20 minutes before realizing the fight was hopeless. Instead, Leah organized her team immediately. Minsu, take 3 people to the high ground, pick off targets from above. Yan, set up a bottleneck here. Make them come through single file. Everyone else, fall back to secondary positions. They fought for an hour, then 2 hours. The humans used tactics the Coalition had never seen. They retreated, then ambushed. They faked weakness to draw enemies in, then struck from unexpected angles. They used the terrain, the shadows, everything available. When they ran out of ammunition, they used rocks. When they ran out of weapons entirely, they used their hands. When they were injured, they kept fighting. Leah took a simulated shot to the leg that should have incapacitated her. She tied it off and kept commanding her team. They should have surrendered hours ago, one of the observers muttered. Why would they surrender? Another asked. What do they gain from giving up? They gain survival. They're not trying to survive. Look at them. They're trying to win. But that wasn't quite right either. General Nari Choi, watching from the back of the observation deck, understood what was really happening. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to make the cost so high that no real enemy would want to pay it. 14 hours into the simulation, the humans were still fighting. They had killed over 1,800 holographic enemies. Their own losses meant nothing in a simulation, but the effort was real. They were exhausted, injured, barely able to stand. But they kept fighting. Finally, War Master Kryn stopped the simulation. The holographic enemies disappeared. The humans collapsed where they stood, gasping for air. Kryn descended to the canyon floor. He stood over Leah, who was too tired to even look up. "Why didn't you surrender?" he asked. "What's the point of surrendering?" Leah managed to say between breaths. "In a real fight, the enemy doesn't let you go just because you give up. This wasn't a real fight. Felt real enough." Leah finally looked up at him. "Did we pass your test?" Kryn didn't answer. He turned and left the simulation room. In the observation deck, he called for General Nari. She was the highest-ranking human military officer, a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I need to understand," Kryn said without preamble. "Your people, how do they fight?" Nari smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "How much time do you have?" Over the next hours, she explained human military history. She told him about total war, where entire nations mobilized every resource for victory. She explained scorched earth tactics, where armies destroyed their own lands to deny them to the enemy. She taught him about mutually assured destruction, where weapons existed that could end all life, and humans built them anyway. "We had wars that lasted 30 years, she said calmly. "Wars that killed half our population. We created weapons that could poison entire continents. We bombed our own cities to deny them to enemies. We developed tactics where soldiers would sacrifice themselves just to take a few enemies with them." Kryn listened with growing horror. "On Earth," Nari continued, "we have a saying, no prisoners. It means fight to the death, give no mercy, expect none in return. Another saying, they made a desert and called it peace. It means we would rather destroy everything than let an enemy have it." "This is madness," Kryn said. "No," Nari corrected. "This is survival. Earth was never kind to humanity. We learned to be unkind back. We learned that the only way to stop a fight was to make the cost so terrible that no one wanted to fight us again." She pulled up historical records. Images of Earth's wars filled the screens. Cities reduced to rubble, oceans burning with oil, nuclear explosions that turned sand to glass, humans fighting in jungles, deserts, frozen tundra, urban streets, humans fighting with guns, with knives, with bare hands. "You wanted to know if humans can fight," Nari said quietly. "The question you should ask is, can you handle what happens when humans do?" Kryn left that meeting a changed being. He had fought 73 battles. He had seen death and violence, but he had never seen war the way humans understood it. The Coalition fought battles. Humans fought wars. There was a difference. That night, an emergency session of the Council was called. War Master Kryn gave his report. His message was simple and terrifying. Humans don't fight to win. They fight to make the enemy lose. They will burn everything, including themselves, to stop an enemy. They don't know how to give up. They barely understand the concept of surrender. And worst of all, they can make other species think like them. They can teach courage. The council members looked at each other with fear in their eyes. "We thought they were defective because they didn't fear us," Kryn concluded. "We were wrong. They're not defective. They're dangerous. Not because they lack fear, but because they've learned to weaponize it. They make their enemies afraid." For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Coalition was afraid of a new member species. And they had no idea what to do about it. 4 months after humanity's first contact with the Coalition, the invasion came from dark space. No warning, no negotiation, just death. The Scartha had been thought extinct for 1,000 years. They were a hive mind species, billions of bodies controlled by one consciousness. They didn't negotiate because negotiation required seeing other beings as separate entities. To the Scartha, everything was either part of the hive or food. Their ships appeared at the edge of Coalition space, massive organic vessels that looked like they were grown rather than built. They tore through the frontier worlds in days. Coalition fleets tried to stop them and were destroyed. The Scartha didn't just kill, they consumed. Entire planets were stripped of all biological matter, leaving dead rocks behind. Panic spread through the Coalition faster than the Scartha themselves. Species that had lived in peace for thousands of years didn't know how to fight a war of survival. The Council met in emergency session, and the discussion quickly turned to surrender. "We cannot defeat them," High Chancellor Vexthar stated. "Our military was designed for peacekeeping, not total war. We must negotiate." "They don't negotiate," War Master Kryn argued. "They only consume. Then we evacuate. We retreat to the core worlds and fortify." In the back of the chamber, Admiral Quan Li listened to the debate with growing frustration. He was the commander of humanity's small fleet, 23 ships that were old by human standards and primitive compared to Coalition technology. Officially, humans were still just probationary members. They had no obligation to fight, but Quan had been a soldier his whole life. He understood what was happening here. The Coalition had forgotten how to fight because they had forgotten why fighting mattered. He stood up. "Admiral Quan Li, Human Fleet, requesting permission to speak." The chamber went quiet. Many of the council members looked uncomfortable. Humans made them nervous after the reports from War Master Kryn. "Speak," Vexthar said. "How long until the Scartha reach the core worlds?" Quan asked. 3 weeks, perhaps 4. "And how many citizens are you evacuating?" "As many as possible, perhaps half." Quan nodded slowly. "So you're abandoning 4 billion people." "We have no choice." "There's always a choice," Quan said quietly. He looked around the chamber. "My fleet will hold the line at Sector 47. We'll buy you time for your evacuation." "Admiral, your fleet cannot stop the Scartha. You have 23 ships. They have thousands." "I know." The chamber erupted in confusion. One council member, a bird-like alien with silver feathers, spoke up. "You know you cannot win, yet you will fight anyway." "Why?" Quan smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Because those 4 billion people you're leaving behind deserve someone to try. Because running away feels wrong. And because," he paused, "because humans are really, really good at making others pay for their victories." 3 days later, Quan's fleet arrived at Sector 47. Behind them, massive evacuation ships were pulling people off dying worlds. In front of them, the Scartha fleet approached like a dark wall. Major Sora Yoon stood on the bridge of her ship, the Indomitable. She was special operations, trained in boarding actions and close combat. Around her, her team prepared their gear. They knew what was coming. "This is insane," her second-in-command muttered. "We're going to board their ships?" "That's the plan," Sora confirmed. She checked her weapons one more time. The Scartha are a hive mind. They're used to fighting at a distance, ship to ship. They won't expect us to come aboard. "There's a reason they won't expect it. It's suicide." "Probably," Sora agreed cheerfully. "You can stay here if you want." He didn't. None of them did. When the battle began, it was chaos. The Scartha ships fired weapons that dissolved shields and melted armor. Coalition technology was better, but the Scartha had numbers. For every enemy ship destroyed, 2 more appeared. Then Quan gave the order humans had been waiting for. "All ships, attack pattern Delta. Get in close." The human ships dove into the enemy fleet, moving faster and more aggressively than the Scartha expected. They weren't trying to win through superior firepower. They were trying to get close enough to board. Sora's team hit the first bioship hard. They cut through the hull and poured inside, guns blazing. The interior was organic, pulsing walls of flesh and strange growths that might have been organs. The Scartha warriors inside were insectoid, with razor-sharp claws and acidic spit. The humans fought them in the corridors, hand to hand, when ammunition ran out. Sora watched one of her team members get hit by acid that melted through his armor. He screamed but kept fighting, shooting until his gun was empty, then using it as a club. "Find the neural cluster," Sora shouted. Every Scartha bioship had one, a central node that controlled that section of the hive. Destroy it, and the ship died. They pushed deeper into the ship, leaving bodies behind. Human and Scartha both. The hive mind had never experienced this kind of fighting before. It was used to overwhelming enemies with numbers. But in the tight corridors, numbers meant nothing. Every intersection became a battlefield. Above the planet, pilot Hana Park flew her fighter into impossible spaces. She was one of the best pilots in the human fleet, with reflexes that bordered on superhuman. She wove between Scartha ships, dodging weapons fire that should have killed her a dozen times over. Her fighter took a hit. Systems failed. She was going down. But instead of ejecting, she aimed her dying ship at a Scartha vessel and accelerated. "See you on the other side," she said calmly, and then her fighter hit the enemy ship at full speed. The explosion tore through the bio-ship's hull, crippling it. She wasn't the only one. When human ships were disabled, their crews didn't surrender. They rammed into enemies. They set their reactors to overload and drifted into Scartha formations. They found ways to keep fighting even in death. The Scartha hive mind began to experience something new. Not fear exactly. It was a collective entity. It couldn't fear for itself. But it felt uncertainty. Every human ship it destroyed took 2 or 3 Scartha vessels with it. Every boarding action cost dozens of bio-ships. The math wasn't working out. Humans were supposed to die easily. They were small, soft creatures. But they kept fighting with injuries that should have stopped them. They fought with broken bones, with burns, with limbs missing. They fought until they physically couldn't anymore. And even then, they found ways to do damage. On the 6th day of battle, Sora's team found the main neural cluster of a command bio-ship. It was massive, pulsing with bioluminescent light. Sora was the only member of her original team still alive. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds. Her armor was cracked. She could barely stand. She placed the charges anyway. "This is for Hana," she said, "and for everyone else you've killed." The explosion ripped through the command ship, and without its coordination, an entire section of the Scartha fleet became disorganized. Admiral Quan watched from his flagship as the battle raged. He had started with 23 ships. Now he had 3. His crew was exhausted. Most were wounded. They had been fighting for 6 days straight without rest, but they had held the line. Behind them, the evacuation was nearly complete. 4 billion people had been saved. The Scartha fleet suddenly began to retreat. For the first time in their history, they were pulling back from a battle. The hive mind had done the math. Yes, it could destroy the remaining human ships. But the cost would be too high. These creatures fought like nothing it had ever encountered. They didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They just kept killing until they died. It wasn't worth it. As the Scartha fleet disappeared into dark space, Quan collapsed into his command chair. His hands were shaking. Around him, his crew was silent. They had won, but the victory felt hollow. So many dead. So much sacrifice. A message came through from the coalition. High Chancellor Vexthar's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Admiral Quan, the evacuation is complete. 4 billion. 200 million citizens are safe. They're safe because of you, because of your fleet." Quan looked at his remaining ships. 3 out of 23. 78% casualties. On his ship alone, half the crew was dead. "We held the line," he said simply. "You did more than that," Vexthar replied. "You showed us what courage looks like. You showed us that some things are worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible." Quan closed his eyes. He thought about Hana, who flew her fighter into an enemy ship. About Sora, who walked into hell and planted bombs with a smile. About all the humans who had stood between the darkness and the light and refused to move. "We just did what needed doing," he said. "No," Vexithar corrected gently. "You did what we had forgotten how to do. You reminded us that peace is worth fighting for, that others are worth dying for. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The call ended. Quan sat in his chair, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Scartha were regrouping. They would come again someday. But now the coalition knew something it hadn't known before. They knew how to fight back. Not because they were strong, but because they had learned from humans that strength wasn't just about weapons and ships. It was about deciding that some things mattered more than survival. It was about courage. 6 months after the Scartha retreat, the council chamber on Velron Prime was filled to capacity. Every species in the coalition had sent representatives. They had come to decide the fate of humanity. Counselor Jin Choi was the first human ever appointed to the council. He was old, with white hair and eyes that had seen too much. He had been a philosopher back on Earth, teaching students about ethics and meaning. Now he stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The debate had been raging for hours. Some species argued that humans were too dangerous to be trusted. They pointed to humanity's violent history, their refusal to surrender, their willingness to die for causes that logic said were hopeless. They are unstable, argued a delegate from the Quelnar species. They form emotional bonds too easily. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. They take risks that no rational species would take. Others argued for gratitude. Without humans, billions would have died when the Scartha invaded. The evacuation would have failed. The frontier worlds would have fallen faster, and the core worlds would have been next. They saved us, Ambassador Yuna Lee had testified earlier. Not because they had to, not because it benefited them, but because it was right. Shouldn't that count for something? Now, as the debate wound down, High Chancellor Vexthar called for silence. He looked different than he had 6 months ago. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something that might have been respect, or maybe fear. Perhaps both. Counselor Jin, Vexthar said, his mandibles clicking slowly. You have listened to hours of debate about your species. Do you wish to speak? Jin stepped forward. He was small compared to most of the aliens in the chamber, but his presence filled the space. He looked around at the gathered representatives, taking his time. I've heard a lot of words today, he began. His voice was calm, measured. Fear, danger, instability, violence, all used to describe humanity. He paused. But I noticed something. No one has used one word. No one has said, courage. The chamber was silent. You say you knew fear, Jin continued. But did you? Really? He walked slowly across the floor, addressing different sections of the audience. Fear is the recognition of danger. All living things have it. It's biological. Even plants react to threats. He stopped and turned to face Vexthar directly. But you built your civilization by removing fear. You eliminated predators. You controlled your environments. You made peace by making sure nothing was ever dangerous enough to be afraid of. You didn't conquer fear. You just removed it from your lives. One of the council members spoke up. And what is wrong with that? We created peace. Nothing is wrong with it, Jin agreed. It's admirable. 12,000 years of peace is an incredible achievement, but it left you unprepared. He brought up a holographic display. It showed footage from the Scartha invasion. Coalition ships fleeing, worlds being evacuated in panic. And then, human ships charging into the enemy fleet. Humans evolved differently, Jin explained. We come from a death world. Earth tried to kill us in 1,000 different ways. Predators, diseases, weather, food scarcity, other humans. We couldn't remove fear from our lives because danger was everywhere. The hologram changed, showing various images from Earth's history. Humans climbing mountains, exploring oceans, venturing into space. Humans running into burning buildings to save others. Humans standing between danger and the innocent. So we learned something you never needed to learn, Jin said quietly. We learned courage, not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. We learned to be afraid and keep moving anyway. That is what makes you dangerous, Vexthar said. Yes, Jin agreed. And it's also what makes us valuable. He looked around the chamber again. The Scartha showed you something. They showed you that peace without the will to defend it is just waiting to die. You needed someone who knew how to fight. Not because they enjoyed violence, but because they understood that some things are worth fighting for. A council member from the bird-like species stood up. You expect us to become like you? To embrace violence and risk? No, Jin shook his head. I don't want you to become like humans. I want you to learn what humans know. There's a difference. He changed the hologram again. Now it showed scenes from after the battle. Human soldiers teaching coalition forces. Not just tactics and weapons, but something deeper. Fear isn't your enemy, Jin explained. Fear keeps you alive. Fear tells you when danger is real. The problem isn't feeling afraid. The problem is letting fear control you. The hologram showed Cadet Leah from the military academy. She was working with a young alien recruit who was clearly terrified during a training exercise. Leah wasn't pushing the alien to be fearless. She was teaching them to act despite being afraid. Courage can be taught, Jin said. Not by removing fear, but by learning to walk through it. That's what Admiral Quan did. That's what Lieutenant Gina did at Station Theta 9. That's what every human who fought the Scartha did. They felt fear. They just didn't let it stop them. He turned back to Vexthar. You asked us here 6 months ago and tried to make us afraid. Do you remember what Captain Day told you? Vexthar's mandibles clicked softly. He said humans don't respond well to bullies. He also said something else. He said humans are used to being afraid. We live with fear every day. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of death. But we've learned that the only thing stronger than fear is the decision to protect something that matters. Jin's voice grew stronger. The coalition has existed for 12,000 years on the foundation of removing threats. Humans have existed for 200,000 years on the foundation of facing them. You need what we know, and we need what you know. Together, we can build something better than either of us could alone. He pulled up one final image. It showed humans and aliens working together on a new military base. Training together, eating together, laughing together. The barriers between species were breaking down. I propose we change the coalition's motto, Jin said. Instead of through unity peace, I suggest through courage peace. Because peace isn't just the absence of a war. It's the willingness to stand against anything that threatens it. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, War Master Kryn stood up. His 6 limbs moved with deliberate grace as he approached Jin. You taught my soldiers something I couldn't, Kryn said. His voice was thoughtful. You taught them that being afraid is acceptable. That courage isn't about being the strongest or the toughest. It's about deciding that something matters more than your own safety. He turned to address the council. I was terrified of humans when I first understood what they were. I thought they were going to bring violence and chaos, but I was wrong. They brought something we had lost. They brought the memory of why civilization is worth defending, not because it's safe, but because it's worth fighting for. Other council members began to stand. One by one, they voiced their support. Not all of them, but enough. The vote was called. Humanity was accepted as full members of the Galactic Coalition. Not just accepted, but given a new role. Humans would serve as the guardians of Coalition space. They would train other species in courage and defense. They would be the ones who stood between the darkness and the light. Later that night, Admiral Quan stood on a balcony overlooking the alien city. The lights were beautiful, thousands of different colors representing dozens of species living together. General Nari joined him, bringing 2 cups of tea. We did it, she said. We're in. Yeah, Quan agreed. He was thinking about his crew, the ones who died holding the line against the Scartha. But we paid a price. We always do. Nari looked up at the stars. Back on Earth, we learned that freedom isn't free. Peace isn't free. Everything worth having comes with a cost. You think they'll learn that? The other species? Some will. Counselor Jin is already setting up training programs. Captain Day has been promoted to Fleet Admiral. He's reorganizing the coalition military. Lieutenant Gina is teaching emergency response. We're spreading out, sharing what we know. Quan smiled slightly. Teaching them to be afraid. No, Nari corrected, teaching them that being afraid is okay. That courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose every single day. Far above them, Earth's moon was visible through the clear night sky, a small blue-green world that had birthed something unique in the galaxy, a species that knew fear intimately and had learned to dance with it rather than run from it. Somewhere in the darkness of space, the Scartha were regrouping. They would return someday. But when they did, they would face something they had never encountered before. A coalition that had learned to fight back. A galaxy that remembered courage. And leading the defense would be humans, the species that had walked through fire and taught others that some things were worth burning for. On a training field below the balcony, Cadet Leo worked with a group of young aliens. They were afraid, uncertain, wondering if they could ever be brave enough. Leah smiled at them, remembering her own training. Fear isn't your enemy, she told them, just as Jin had told her. Fear is your alarm system. It tells you when something matters. And once you know something matters, you have a choice. You can run away or you can run toward it. She demonstrated a move, showing them how to stand firm when instinct said to flee. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. That's what humans learned. And now we're going to teach you. The aliens watched her with new eyes. They were still afraid. But now they had something else too. They had hope. Hope that they could learn to be brave. Hope that they could protect what mattered. Hope that courage, like fear, was contagious. And in the council chamber where the motto had been changed to, "Through courage, peace," a new era began. An era where the galaxy remembered that peace was worth fighting for, that others were worth dying for. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The aliens had believed they knew fear. They were right about that. But humans had shown them something more important. They had shown them courage, and that made all the difference.